replied softly, "Me too, Dad." Then the man stood up and gazed in the eyes of his oldest son, maybe 9 or 10, and while cupping his son's face in his hands, he said, "You're already quite the young man. I love you very much, Zach." They too hugged a most loving, tender hug. While this was happening, a baby girl, perhaps 1.5, was squirming excitedly in her mother's arms, never once taking her little eyes off the wonderful sight of her returning father. The man said, "Hi, baby girl," as he gently took the child from her mother. He quickly kissed her face all over and then held her close to his chest while rocking her from side to side. The little girl instantly relaxed and simply laid her head on his shoulder, motionless in pure contentment. After several moments, he handed his daughter to his oldest son and declared, "I've saved the best for last," and proceeded to give his wife the longest, most passionate kiss I ever remember seeing. He gazed into her eyes for several seconds and then silently mouthed, "I love you so much." They stared at each other's eyes, beaming big smiles at one another while holding both hands. For an instant, they reminded me of newlyweds, but I knew by the age of their kids that they couldn't possibly be. I puzzled about it for a moment, then realized how totally engrossed I was in the wonderful display of unconditional love not more than an arm's length away from me. I suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if I was invading something sacred, but was amazed to hear my own voice nervously say, "Wow, how long have you two been married?" "Been dating 14 years, married a total of 12 years, he replied without breaking his gaze upon his lovely wife. "Well then, how long have you been away?" The man finally turned and looked at me, still beaming with his joyous smile. "2 whole days. That's what we're looking for. That's the kind of relationship we want you young folks to have. That you make a commitment that you are just as much in love, or probably more so after 44 years than after 4 years or 12 years. And so that's what I want for you. But you know the stats, and you know the heartaches, and you know the fact that about 40% of young men don't have a dad in their home. You know the reality of that. But we can be chain breakers, and we can follow a pattern that will produce love for a lifetime. So I want you to think with me a little bit about that. I'm going to try some of this technology stuff. I'm sure glad Wes knows all about all this stuff so he can keep me going. I want you to think about some of the things that we're looking at and some of the things that we're considering. This is an old survey, 2018. Young Americans today are less likely to be married than any prior generation. In 1965, nearly 80% of the silent generation members between 21 and 36 years old were married. Today, just 37% of millennials that same age are married. Do you notice the drop? As you look along with us as we're thinking about love for a lifetime and the privilege of planning that, marriage is out of vogue. Now please notice that less than half of the young people today are getting married, but that doesn't mean they're not in a hookup culture. That doesn't mean they're doing without the sexual privileges that God designs for marriage. They're just bypassing marriage and just living together. And that's creating tremendous havoc in their lives. And by the way, all the slides are available to you. If you want the PowerPoints, you're welcome to all of those. But that's where we live. So I'm going to be pretty candid today. I usually talk to teen guys. I usually talk to college guys. I have young men who are accountability partners with me. I've asked them especially to be praying for me since Cindy's not with me this week. And I know a lot of the stats about what you're dealing with. I have a 12-year-old grandson. I know what he deals with at middle school. So don't try to even act like we don't know what we're talking about. But we can seek to serve God and glorify Him even as young people. So I hope that you'll give that consideration. I want you to think about how we do dating in contrast to how most of the world has formed relationships of marriage in the past. I have a friend from India. My daughter, when at Bowling Green, became very close friends with this young lady. Because she didn't find someone here in America, someone had already been provided for her back in India. It was an arranged marriage, and her dad, as a brother in Christ, wanted to provide a young man for his daughter that would be committed. That's the way it's been most of the time throughout history, is dads and moms look to see what kind of relationship would best suit the particular personality of my child. And so in America, we've chosen a dating relationship rather than a courtship relationship, and it's not always been real productive. We want to consider some of those things as we walk through this. I want you to think about some highly defective types of dating. I want to suggest to you that dating often leads to intimacy, but it doesn't necessarily lead to commitment. In other words, I'm going to talk so the kids understand what I'm saying. In other words, we've moved from the front porch where we swing together and the parents are looking through the window to see how we're doing, to hopping into the back seat of the car on the first or second date. And so what's happened is we have totally disrupted the whole process of bonding. And what we're realizing, as these two doctors point out in this book, Hooked and Hookup Culture, is we have destroyed intimacy because we've not walked through the process of bonding. So I want you to note with me, as Dobson put this together several years ago, here's how it goes, at least how it used to go. You catch the eye of someone after they've checked out your body. And then you notice, hey, they looked back. And then she spoke to me. What do I say now? Okay. And then there is the first time you held hands, and the endorphins are going wild. Dopamine's really bouncing now. And then there is the, I'm just stretching a little bit, and he puts his hand around your shoulder. And you either take it off or you let him keep his hand around your shoulder. Then there is the more intimate move where he actually puts his hand around your waist. And then there's the just googly-eyed, face-to-face look that goes on seemingly for hours. Only now we call it FaceTime. And so as that continues to develop, there is the very, very special touch of hand-to-head. You don't touch somebody's head, even typically a little kid, unless you know them. You know, for somebody to touch your head, that says, I really trust you. And so those are the steps to bonding that will create a bond. You see, the oxytocin, the dopamine, and the vasopressin create synapses in the brain. The oxytocin, for example, with a mom, when she breastfeeds her baby, the oxytocin just creates a chemical bond in the brain. And when these steps are skipped in the dating process, and you go more to those ones that are down on the bottom that aren't listed, what you've done is you've short-circuited God's design for marriage, and you begin bonding with someone you don't even know. You just hooked up with them. And so you've short-circuited and messed up the wiring which God designed. All those things that I just described in the chemical process, God designed for marriage, so a husband and wife will cleave to one another. But if you start doing that with someone you're not married to, and then you break it off, you have ruptured the bonding process, and it gets to be a serial divorce mentality in the dating process. And so you've really messed up your mind. You've destroyed what God intended in the purpose, and we have a lot of fallout in our culture as a result. So dating often leads to intimacy, but not commitment. And as we note also, dating often skips friendship. That when we think about it, the people that are going to form the best relationships are people you've known and appreciated for some time. And it takes a while for somebody to become your friend. Friends, as C.S. Lewis says, are two people walking in the same direction. And so when you have a daughter who says, oh yeah, he's my boyfriend, but you say, well, why don't you bring him to Bible class? Oh, I couldn't bring him to Bible class. Why not? Isn't he your friend? Isn't your relationship with God the most important relationship in all your life? Why would you be making out with him, but you wouldn't want him to be seen in a Bible class with you? See, there's no friendship there. There's just a sexual attraction without any friendship, and that creates serious commitment challenges. And so dating often mistakes a physical relationship for love. And for some of us, me, I'll just tell you, the first time I ever kissed a girl was my wife. And wow, I didn't sleep hardly at all that night. It was amazing. I mean, everything's fiery. I'm so excited. But you know, I didn't love Cindy quite yet. And I wouldn't recommend going to that kissing route first. In fact, I have several good friends who determined in their dating relationship they weren't going to kiss until they got married. Now, I'm not telling you have to do that. Obviously, I didn't do that. But I am suggesting to you that sometimes those feelings get in the way of determining whether I really love somebody or not. Love is a determination that I care more about you than I care about me. See, love can wait to give. Lust can't wait to get. And I want you to keep that in your mind. When he tells you, oh, I just love you and I can't wait, you know who he loves? He loves himself. He didn't love you. He just wants to use you. And once he's used you, he will drop you and you will be brokenhearted. And so wisdom helps us to think about, and I had to work, it took me several months, almost a year, to work through, do I love her or do I lust her? Do I really have a commitment that come our honeymoon at Cheehaw here in Alabama, if we have a wreck and she is injured so that she can never have a sexual relationship the rest of our life, will I be committed to her for life? You see, that's when you're considering commitment. That's when you're considering, do I really have an active goodwill for this person, or do I just like being around them? Or do I like what they make me feel like when I'm around them? There's a big difference between that kind of love and the kind of love that God calls for us to have in marriage. So Josh Harris, in his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, said, just because lips have met doesn't mean hearts have joined. Josh McDowell, several years ago, did this study. Josh McDowell's always into stats. But as you think about this, and dads, I'd like you to especially kind of notice this. Your primary job for your children, provide and protect. And Dad, I have 2 daughters. And dads, you especially are responsible to protect your little girl. And if that means a 12 gauge, double barrel, or pump action, it just means your job is to protect your little, and I'm almost kidding about that. I do have a friend who's an elder in Indiana who would be fixing up his weapon when he would be interviewing those guys. And so as you notice here, Ages of Dating in the book Why Wait by Josh McDowell. And this is about 30 years old, kids. What you kind of just notice, I'm telling you how old these stats are. So just think about how many of them are going to be involved in a premarital sexual relationship before graduation. Well, if they start dating when they're 12, 91%. In fact, where we live, in the middle school, the kids are having sex in the bathroom. Okay? That's where we live. Now, I know that's in the northern country of Tennessee, but that's where we live. And I'd like to suggest to you, maybe in Alabama, you don't live too far from that. And so look at the gap between waiting 1 year before you let your daughter go out with some guy. Do you know this guy? Would you give him the keys to your car? He just comes up to your house, say, I like your daughter. Say, here, take my car. Would you give him the keys to your car? Well, probably not. Would you hand him the keys to your daughter's heart without knowing the boy? Hopefully not. So as we keep looking at that, there's not much change between 13 and 14 years old. 15 years old, a little bit of notice. 16 years old. So some of you think, oh man, Alan, you just blew it for me. I'm only 14 and I was trying to get my mom and dad to let me start dating. Nobody's wanting to hurt you. In fact, in Deuteronomy 6, God says, I give all these rules for your good and for your survival. It's because your parents love you that they say no. And dads, of all people, know what young men are thinking. Don't you, dads? And so as you keep thinking about that, dating often isolates a couple from other vital relationships. A couple things are really helpful. If you're really serious about, you think you want to marry somebody, spend a week working with her dad. Spend a week at their house listening to the conversations. Watch what's important to them. Watch what they watch and watch how they work. And what happens so many times is in these formative years, we call them teenagers. That's a pretty new term, by the way, if you want to Google it. Teens is not a very old term. That this era of irresponsibility between 13 and 21, which didn't exist in the 1700s, that we have basically indicated that if you spend, I got my phone this morning, told me I'd spent 2 hours of screen time on average last week on a day. Young people on an average today spend over 5 hours a day in screen time. So much of your time is spent with Twitter or Facebook or hopefully not TikTok and some other violent social medias. But you don't really get to know someone simply by seeing them on a screen. You can Zoom all you want, but you don't really see the facial features. And so vital relationships, things I need to be doing as a young person, needs to be considered in all of this. Relationships with parents, grandparents. Some of the joys that I have is when Cindy and I would spend time with my grandparents. I can remember being up on this hill back in West Virginia where I grew up and helping my grandpa mow his remote cemetery and sitting down, eating a sandwich and asking him, well, tell me about what I should know about marriage. And what do you think of Cindy? Well, before he ever met her, she was on the tractor and I was cultivating the potatoes. And so valuing the perspective of grandparents, you know between your age 14 and 20, your parents are blooming idiots. But then you realize when you get to be about 23 or 24, it's amazing how much your parents have learned in the last 2 or 3 years. And so if it's not your parents, look to somebody else who you can talk to. Look to somebody else. And young people, if you see somebody you think has a good marriage, you said, can I interview you? Can I talk with you? I see that you love your wife. I see that you love your husband. I see that you cherish one another. I see that you have a relationship that glorifies God. Can you help me with this? If you're spending all your time with googly eyes looking at that guy on the screen, you're not going to have time for those vital relationships. Time for Bible study and spiritual service is often sacrificed because of your dating relationship. So dating often distracts us from preparing for adult responsibilities. Would you look in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8? I don't think it's going to come up on the screen here, but in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, if anyone does not provide for, how's that go? His own, especially his own, now you're having to check it. I love that. His own household, he's done what? He's denied. Thanks, Perby. He's denied the faith and is worse than an infidel, if you're reading King James, worse than an unbeliever. First responsibility, guys. Did you hear I said guys? You know, I have a friend who pointed out to me when it says, if any does not provide for his own, how have we always read that? If any man does not provide for his own. Isn't that the kind of the way we learned it? Actually, if you look in the text and you look in the original language, it's if any. It's anthropos. It's man or woman. You don't provide for your own, you are worse than an unbeliever. It's first order of responsibility, guys. again, I'm going to kind of go to the guys, is what? If you can't provide for her, you're what? Not ready for marriage. Now, I understand there is the PhD, and I have friends who've done that. If you don't know, the PhD is the post-hole digger. The PhD is the put hubby through. Okay, I understand how that works sometimes. But if you'll go to a cemetery where people 100 years ago got buried, what you'll almost always notice is the guy is about 3 to 5 years older than the girl. Almost always. Did you ever wonder why? It's because her dad said, if you don't have a place, if you don't have a cow, if you don't have a pig, if you don't have some chickens, and you don't have a mule to till, then you're not ready to marry my daughter, because your job is to provide. Ha! And so getting ready for marriage is going to take a lot of work. Being ready to provide is important. I have a friend, Alabama friend, taught me in psychology in college. He said 2 people can live as cheap as 1. Just half as long. So at some point the money runs out and living on love gets kind of lean. There just needs to be some providing in the planning process, and those are adult responsibilities. Titus chapter 2 is going to speak about that. I guess it did come up on the screen. That's the trouble with me not remembering in these old ages. In Titus in chapter 2, I want you to notice verses 2 through 5. Here's a responsibility for the older ladies to train the younger women to love their husbands. You notice that? Loving your husband is a training exercise. In some ways, it is not going to come naturally. And young ladies, please be advised that if you're trying to get away from your dad, you may run right into his arms because your husband's going to be a lot like him. And if you have this ideal dad, please be advised that probably your husband's not going to be that ideal guy. Don't marry a mirage. Be real about what you're looking at. And so young women have to take time to learn about self-control, purity, busy at home. Busy at home. Home makers, home workers. Young lady, hear me. My wife's taught school for a long time. But first and best, she serves at home. That's her first responsibility, family-wise, as a precious daughter of our King. Working at home doesn't mean you don't work somewhere else. If you read Proverbs 31, this wise mama is telling her son, look for a woman who's very industrious, who's very much involved in the real estate business. And so we're not saying women shouldn't work. Any man who's had a wife had surgery and had to take care of little kids knows my wife works. And so we have to learn to do that. We have to learn how to provide what is needed in a family, a worker at home. So courtship is for young women who've prepared themselves to be wives and mothers. I want you to think about this for a minute. Why would I be dating someone I have no intention of marrying? Why would I be so intimately involved in this relationship when I don't have any desire whatsoever to marry that person? Are you toying with some young man's emotions? What are you doing here? And so youth is a time to have fun. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these, God will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove sorrow from your heart and put away evil from your flesh. From childhood and youth, they're vanity. I have a young lady I think didn't like me very much for a while, maybe still, because she, and I can't give you more particulars, she and somebody I'm very close to were dating, but he wanted to play golf. I said, play golf. Play every day. Play golf. Hit that little ball as long as you want, as hard as you want, as far as you can. Just keep it. Because until he got the golf out of his system, he wasn't ready to be a husband. Because a lot of what happens is women are looking for men and they find boys who are simply playing games. Now, the games get more complicated and more expensive, but you marry a boy and he stays a boy and he just plays his games. That's not what marriage is about. Now, it doesn't mean that guys don't need to take the weekend and hit a ball or shoot a deer or whatever it is that you need to do. But it means that your commitment is to her, not to your own entertainment. As we think about dating, it can cause discontentment with singleness. There's a lot of pressure, particularly from the social media. Are you in a relationship? And if you're a young woman, particularly if you're a young woman, and you can't click, I'm in a relationship, oh, well, you're the scorn of all of your peers. Shut it off. Don't listen to them. There is a great value in being a single Christian who's devoted to serving Jesus Christ. And when I presented this up at the East Side, there was about 120 kids in the congregation there in Bowling Green. And one young man who's about 30 said, "Amen. It's okay to be single. And there's a whole lot of things you can do as a single Christian that you just can't quite do anymore once you're married." And Paul acknowledges that in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, "I would like you to be free from concern. An unmarried man is concerned about the Lord's affairs, how he can please the Lord." It's okay to be single. Be content with that. And if there's a present distress in your life, you need to just stay single until you're ready. And it's okay to wait. And most young people today are waiting well into their 20s, if not 30, before marriage. But unfortunately, they're not always waiting for that sexual fulfillment. And so dating is going to create an artificial environment for the evaluation of character. My dad said this when I was a kid, he said, "You'll never get married." My manners weren't that good at the table. Didn't do well, you know. So he was just shaking his head that because you're so poor-mannered at the table, nobody's at one date and you're done, buddy. You know? And so on a date, I'm trying my best to impress that girl. I'm trying not to slurp or burp or any other thing like that. I'm trying not to spill things on myself. I'm trying not to dump things on her. I'm really trying to behave. I'm watching my language. I'm being careful what I look at. I am on display here, and I got to look good. But does she see the real me? No. And so it creates an artificial setting. And you know what a lot of young people do? We're going to go on a date. You know what they do? They go to a movie. And yeah, he tries the reach around the arm thing that we talked about earlier. But how much did they learn about each other at that movie? Not a lick. But that's what they call a date. You know what intimacy is? Intimacy is into me see. If you want to write something down, that'd be worth writing. Into me see. I want you to see into me. I want you to see who I am as a person. I want you to know me personally. I want you to know my heart, my feelings, my heartaches. Into me see. Young ladies, there's so many young men who abuse you because they have no clue what intimacy is. It was burned out of their mind by the time they were 12. You see, the average young man starts looking at pornography between age 10 and 12. And many of them are hooked, literally, by age 12. And it is all over the middle school. And the girls are groaning as if they're having a relationship in the classroom. And the guys are stuffing the pornography in your face because everybody has a computer at school. And if I seem a little agitated about it, I am. And it destroys intimacy. It just takes women and says, you're just a piece of meat for me to use for my pleasure. It's ungodly whether you're 16 or 60. And it does hook you. It is an addiction just like cocaine. Same processes in the brain occur in both of those addictive behaviors. And so, kind of need to think differently. Every relationship is an opportunity to model Christ's love. I do want to make one other observation before we go there. Young people not only plow with the grandpa, but do some things that are coming back. I don't know if you've done any premarital wallpapering lately. We didn't do any wallpapering until after we were married. We should have done it before. But try putting up some wallpaper together as a dating couple. And if that's not your thing, just start canoeing some rapids. In the same canoe, both of you, okay? And I know what happens because the woman gets dumped out and she takes that canoe and she flips him out too. So these are things where you're having to work together and it's difficult and it's hard and you're stressed. And it shows how compatible you are. So look for activities that are going to put you to the limit in regard to your compatibility. We need to think more about others than we think about ourselves, not looking only to our own interest, but to the interest of others. We need to have an attitude like Christ. You know, I tried, but I know deep down, really, when Cindy and I got married, I didn't really love her as much as this description gives. I think I do now, but it's a lifetime of learning. And so, as we think about the challenges that you face, and I'm talking about middle school kids, it is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control his own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the heathen who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong his brother or take advantage of him. The Lord will punish men for all such sins, as we've already told you and warned you. Young men, don't take advantage of her. Don't press her for something that you know is not right and she knows is not right and is going to wound her conscience and wound yours and ruin a relationship. Love can wait. It's lust that doesn't. So it's really important to learn self-control. Ephesians chapter 5 is going to speak to that as well. But among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or of any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity. Listen to how he talks. Listen to how he talks about women and girls. And ask him to have free rein to see everything he looks at on his computer and his phone. If he won't give you unfettered, unrestricted availability to see everything he's looking at, you can be pretty sure there's a problem there. And men and young men are really good at lying about that. If you need some additional help in that regard, be glad to recommend some resources. Listen to how they talk. No obscenity, no foolish talk, no coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, that's an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. While we speak briefly about pornography, it's not just a guy problem. And if you need help, ladies, I know some young ladies who have come through that journey and they'll be glad to help you. It is a guy problem, but it's also a girl problem. And it is the pandemic far greater than COVID that plagues not only this country, but the world. So courtship is going to show more of the relationship of Christ. I want you to think about this pledge, asking you to make this pledge. Parents of my date place their trust in me. I will not violate it. I will respect this young lady as I expect other men to respect my sister. This young lady will be a wife and a mother someday. She must be an example to her children and the pride of her husband. I will help her to be as pure as I want my wife to be. Our date today will be someone's mate tomorrow. And again, why would you be dating her if you don't have intentions of marriage? Is it simply a social commitment? So intimacy is the reward of commitment. One does not need to pursue a romantic relationship before preparing for marriage. Song of Solomon mentions, do not pursue love before its time. The Corinthians were a pagan culture, and sex was about everything, everywhere. And the argument that was being made is food is for the stomach and the stomach's for food, but God will destroy both it and them. Now, the body is not for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. You can live a lifetime and never have a sexual relationship. It is not a basic need as food is. It's a fallacious argument. Flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you're not your own? For you're bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are Christ. Well, as I look at the time, I'm thinking the trapdoor is about to open, or the teachers of these precious little ones are saying, release me. And so what I want to ask you to do, because I've seen so much heartache. I see so many young men who are so wounded. I see young women, very dear to me, who are wounded because early choices were not God-honoring. So I'm asking, I'm pleading with you to make excellent choices that honor God and will be a tremendous blessing to you and will create a loving relationship that will glorify God for a lifetime. If you think anything I've said is inappropriate or wrong, please don't hesitate to correct me. But if what we've spoken is truth and love, please receive it as it was intended. And may you go and enjoy marriage, and may it be a treasure and a blessing that glorifies God and everybody in your sphere of influence all of your life. Let's pray. Father, please help us. Please strengthen us. Please bless these young people. Please help us to nourish and cherish and direct them. Please help us to own our own sins, our own failures. Help us to be transparent. Help us to be kind. And help us to be encouraging as they seek to be lights in a very dark world. Bless us to this end. In Jesus we pray. Amen. Thank you all.